Imagine this. You're sitting in a room with people you've known your entire life. Friends, family, maybe even a partner, and something feels off. You laugh when they laugh. You nod at the right times. You agree to things you don't fully believe in. But inside, a quiet voice is whispering, "You don't belong here anymore." It's not that they've changed. It's not even that you've become better than them. What's changed is invisible, but it's seismic. A subtle cracking beneath the surface of everything you once accepted without question. Where you once swallowed your discomfort with a polite smile, now even a single dismissive comment lands like a punch to the chest. You leave the room drained, asking yourself, "Why can't I stand this anymore?" Feels like a betrayal of them, of who you used to be. But maybe the betrayal began long ago, when you were trained to tolerate what should have broken you, to adapt to dysfunction, to call it love, to label pain as normal and wear silence like a badge of strength. Have you noticed? The more you heal, the less you can stand empty conversations. The less you can tolerate manipulation disguised as kindness. The less you can force yourself to sit through situations that once defined your identity. You start leaving things unfinished, walking away mid-sentence, saying no without explanation, not because you've grown cold, but because you've finally learned what warmth actually feels like. But here's the paradox. Healing, this sacred, celebrated process, doesn't just bring peace. It brings conflict. It dismantles the false harmony you were raised to preserve. It separates you from the familiar. It turns comfort into claustrophobia. Why? Why does becoming whole make you feel like a stranger in your own life? What if healing isn't just about removing the wound, but also removing the people, places, and habits that kept it open? What if growth is not the gentle unfolding we're sold, but a violent shedding of the parts of you that were never truly you? And here's the most unsettling question of all. What if healing means being willing to be hated for the sake of becoming free? Think about it. How many things in your life did you call normal only because they were familiar? How many people did you keep around not because they nourished you, but because they didn't challenge your pain? There's a silent contract we sign as children. Be agreeable, be quiet, don't make others uncomfortable. Healing rips that contract in half. It dares you to tell the truth. It demands that you stop shrinking to fit into the boxes you've outgrown. But once you do that, once you begin to live from truth instead of fear, everything changes. The meals you once sat through in quiet agony now become unbearable. The relationships that thrived on your silence begin to suffocate. The roles you played so well, peacemaker, fixer, giver, start to rot in your hands. And the world, rather than clapping for your courage, might call you selfish, dramatic, even cruel. But deep down, a question stirs in the ruins. Who was I before I learned to tolerate everything that hurt me? Because tolerance, when born from trauma, not wisdom, is a survival skill, not a virtue. Teaches you to sit still while your soul screams. Teaches you to nod along as your boundaries erode. It teaches you that being nice is more important than being whole. So what happens when you wake up one day and you're no longer willing to survive that way? What happens when the masks fall off and the truth is all that's left? What happens when you realize that healing, real healing, is not about becoming softer, but about becoming so honest that anything false burns in your presence? There's a cost. There's always a cost. But maybe the greater cost is continuing to live in a world that punishes clarity, worships numbness, and calls it balance. The more you heal, the more you feel. The more you feel, the less you can pretend. And the less you pretend, the more the world begins to look like a theater of ghosts clinging to scripts they never wrote. So ask yourself, what do you still tolerate, only because the alternative terrifies you? What are you still calling loyalty, when it's really self-abandonment? What parts of yourself are you still silencing in order to keep the peace that's slowly killing you? Because the moment you begin to heal is the moment tolerance becomes toxic. And if that's true, then maybe the pain you're feeling isn't a failure. Maybe it's your soul resurrecting. And now comes the most important reckoning. Why were we ever taught to tolerate what was meant to be escaped? What if the reason you tolerated so much wasn't weakness, but programming? From the moment you were born, the world handed you scripts, quiet, Invisible scripts with lines you were expected to follow. Be agreeable. Make others comfortable. Don't rock the boat. Don't be too much. Don't be too sensitive. These weren't just family rules. They were survival codes. Break them and you risked losing connection. Risked abandonment. Risked love. You were taught to believe that love was conditional. That peace meant obedience. That discomfort was your fault and therefore yours to fix. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And so we walk through life thinking it's fate that we stay in toxic relationships, fate that we can't speak our truth, fate that we feel invisible in a room full of people. But in truth, it's the unconscious patterns built in childhood, shaped by fear, that direct our every step. And the most devastating pattern? The belief that your ability to endure pain is proof of your worth. Sit with that. How many times have you said, "I can handle it," when you should have said, "This is not okay"? How often have you equated strength with silence? How often have you allowed someone to erode your boundaries just to keep them close? It's not that you're weak. It's that you were raised in a system where survival meant self-abandonment. Nietzsche once observed that the human tendency toward suffering is not weakness, but habit, deeply ingrained, biologically wired habit. He wrote, "Man, the bravest animal and the most accustomed to suffering, does not repudiate suffering as such. He desires it, he even seeks it out. And why? Because suffering becomes familiar, and the familiar, even when it's painful, feels safer than the unknown. This is the paradox. The mind clings to what it knows, even if what it knows is killing it. Your nervous system is a creature of habit. If you were conditioned to equate love with tension, you will find comfort in chaos. If you were raised to equate kindness with appeasement, you will confuse boundaries with cruelty. You'll stay where you're hurting, not because you enjoy it, but because leaving feels like a betrayal of the self you were forced to become. Now, add to this the spiritual insight of Viktor Frankl, who believed that the core drive of man is not pleasure, as Freud insisted, but meaning. And what happens when your suffering becomes meaningful? When your pain becomes your identity? You cling to it. You need it. You tolerate what hurts because you've built your self-image around it. You say, "I'm the strong one. I'm the forgiving one. I'm the loyal one." But what if that strength is just fear in disguise? What if forgiveness has become a shield against accountability? What if loyalty is just a chain? Arthur Schopenhauer believed that much of human suffering comes not from the pain itself, but from the desire to make the pain virtuous. We want to believe there's nobility in enduring, that there's grace in staying, that tolerance makes us good. But goodness that costs you your soul is not goodness. It's martyrdom. And martyrdom is not healing, it's slow erasure. Our society does not teach emotional intelligence. It teaches emotional anesthesia. From an early age, we're told to suppress anger, to hide grief, to turn shame into motivation. But as Jung emphasized, what we repress does not disappear, it festers. It haunts. It takes up residence in the shadow self. And that shadow, the unacknowledged pain, the unspoken resentment, the rage behind your smile, shapes your boundaries. Or rather, your lack of them. The real reason healing makes you intolerant of certain people, habits, and energies is because healing disarms the shadow. You begin to see how much of your tolerance was a trauma response, how much of your kindness was fear of rejection, how many of your relationships were built not on mutual respect, but on your ability to endure. But here's the haunting part. Once you start waking up, you can't go back to sleep. You notice it everywhere. In the friend who only calls when they need something. In the parent who disguises control as concern. In the partner who loves you, but only when you're small. In the job that rewards your burnout but ignores your humanity. It's all been there, but healing sharpens your vision. As Aldous Huxley noted, experience is not what happens to you. It's what you do with what happens to you. And once you begin to metabolize your pain, to understand its origin, its triggers, its disguises, you stop making excuses for it. You stop rationalizing other people's inability to love you properly. You stop tolerating things just because you once could. And then, something terrifying and beautiful happens. You begin to choose yourself. But that choice doesn't come without grief. Because to choose yourself means to grieve the self you had to be for others to love you. It means realizing how much of your life has been lived in reaction, not in creation. How many dreams you've delayed. How many needs you've silenced. How many red flags you've painted white just to keep the illusion intact. Jean-Paul Sartre famously said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." But what if you were never given the tools to make yourself, only to survive yourself? That's the hidden problem. Healing unmasks everything. Not just the wounds, but the systems that produced them. The beliefs that normalized them. The people who benefited from your silence. And that's when the real war begins, not outside, but within. Because part of you will want to go back. To retolerate. To readapt. To reforget. But healing doesn't allow amnesia. It insists on clarity. And clarity, while liberating, is also excruciating. Because now you see what you were never meant to see. You were trained to tolerate pain as a substitute for love. And now you no longer can. Start small. You begin to recoil from conversations that once seemed harmless. Jokes that once made you laugh now feel like thin veils for contempt. You find yourself quietly withdrawing from rooms that drain you, pausing longer before answering texts, hesitating before saying yes. And you feel guilty for it. Because for so long, your nervous system had been taught that closeness, even toxic closeness, was safer than solitude. That harmony, even at the expense of your dignity, was more acceptable than confrontation. But healing rearranges the architecture of your psyche. And suddenly, all the things you once tolerated, passive aggression, emotional neglect, casual cruelty, no longer feel normal. They feel like violations. And that changes everything. You see, the unseen consequence of healing is loss. But not the kind you expected. You don't just lose people. You lose illusions. You lose the illusion that love is supposed to hurt. The illusion that family always means safety. The illusion that boundaries make you selfish. The illusion that your value is measured by your ability to endure. These illusions were never truths, they were survival mechanisms. But they had become so deeply embedded in your operating system that you treated them as law. And when you begin to uninstall them, your whole identity destabilizes. This is where the real disorientation sets in. Because now, the very traits that once won you approval, your over-explaining, over-giving, over-compromising, start to feel like betrayal. Not of others, but of yourself. And the world around you, it doesn't know how to respond. People begin to say you've changed. That you're cold now, distant, harsh. But what they really mean is, you're no longer who I need you to be in order for me to stay comfortable. The moment you begin to set boundaries, those who benefited from your lack of them will either resist or vanish. And at first, it will feel like abandonment. But it's not abandonment. It's alignment. Neurologically, your brain is adapting too. Healing rewires your amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear responses. Once upon a time, standing up for yourself triggered panic. Tight chest, sweaty palms, racing heart. Felt like death because somewhere in your past, maybe it was. As a child, defiance could mean withdrawal of love, punishment, even danger. So your brain coded compliance as survival. That wiring doesn't disappear overnight. It gets triggered every time you try to speak up, walk away, say no. But the more you heal, the more the brain learns that safety can exist within, not just around. That you can survive loss. That silence is not peace. That your voice does not make you dangerous. It makes you visible. And being visible after a lifetime of hiding is revolutionary. But also lonely. Because healing doesn't just redefine how you relate to people. It redefines how you relate to yourself. And that self, the real self, is a stranger at first. It doesn't crave the same chaos. It doesn't need to explain everything. It doesn't beg to be understood. It just is. And that being calm, clear, self-possessed, is misunderstood in a world addicted to emotional noise. Here lies the paradox. The more you become emotionally available to yourself, the more emotionally unavailable you become to others who only knew how to access you through your wounds. They reach for the old version of you, the one who'd self-blame, over-apologize, shrink. But she's gone. And what's left is someone who no longer confuses guilt with love or exhaustion with devotion. And the world pushes back. Because systems, whether familial, romantic, cultural, depend on your unhealed self to stay intact. Think of culture's obsession with the strong woman who holds it all together, or the good man who sacrifices everything without complaint. These archetypes are not built on truth, they are built on tolerance. The ability to absorb pain without disrupting the system. Healing disrupts the system. It says, I will not be the container for your unprocessed pain. Says, love does not require my silence. Says, your comfort is not my responsibility. And for a society built on compliance, that is dangerous. This is why healing is often met with resistance, not celebration. Not because you're wrong, but because you're challenging a collective delusion. That suffering quietly is the same thing as being good. As cognitive bias expert Daniel Kahneman noted, our brains prefer coherence over accuracy. We want things to make sense, even if they're wrong. And so when you begin to change the script, others will interpret your evolution as betrayal. Because it breaks the narrative. They need you to be the forgiver, the fixer, the empath. They need you to stay predictable so their worldview remains intact. But healing forces you to abandon their script in favor of your own. And what a terrifying, liberating moment that is. Because now you realize how much of your life was built on a foundation of endurance, not authenticity. And with every act of self-honoring, every no, every boundary, every exit, you are dismantling that foundation and laying a new one built not on tolerance, but on truth. Yet truth comes with a cost. You lose the ability to pretend, to tolerate half-connections, to entertain friendships where your pain is invisible, to smile through microaggressions, dismissals, subtle jabs masked as jokes. You lose the capacity to shrink yourself to fit places you've outgrown. And that loss? It's not just emotional, it's existential. Because now you see it all, the lies, the performances, the invisible contracts you signed to be loved. And you can't unsee it. That's the unseen consequence of healing. You become unable to lie to yourself anymore. And in that brutal clarity, a new life begins to whisper. One that requires fewer people, fewer performances, fewer compromises. One that isn't rooted in fear, but in integrity. You may not know what that life looks like yet, but you know deep in your bones that you can no longer live the old one. And that's the first taste of true freedom. What if everything you've been told about strength is a lie? What if true power doesn't come from being able to withstand pain, but from finally deciding you won't? What if rebellion isn't loud, fiery, or explosive, but quiet, inward, and sacred? You've reached the edge, the point of no return. You can no longer unknow the truth. The version of you who accepted the unacceptable, who endured mistreatment in the name of love, who stayed silent to be seen as good, they are fading into memory. But now the question becomes, how do you live from here? This is the moment of rebellion. Not the kind that screams in the streets or burns the world down in rage. No, this rebellion is subtler. It's the act of walking away from a table where love is conditional. It's deleting the number you've memorized out of trauma, not joy. It's choosing solitude over codependency, peace over proximity, and self-respect over being liked. It's radical because it's real. To break free, you must first recognize the bait and switch of your past conditioning. You were taught to equate emotional labor with love, to see your capacity to endure as a badge of honor. You learned to read rooms instead of reading your own feelings. You knew how to soothe others before you ever learned to soothe yourself. This wasn't love. This was programming. And unlearning that programming is an act of revolution. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Now, fate no longer has a hold on you. You've seen the pattern. You've traced the wound. The repetition stops with you. But rebellion requires more than awareness. It requires choice. First, the choice to disappoint others. This is one of the hardest choices you will ever make. But if you don't learn to disappoint others, you will spend your entire life disappointing yourself. And your healing didn't bring you this far for you to betray yourself all over again. So you stop explaining your boundaries to those committed to misunderstanding them. You stop offering emotional discounts to people unwilling to pay the price of presence. You stop managing other people's reactions and start managing your own truth. Second, the choice to embrace solitude. Not the kind that isolates you from the world, but the kind that reintroduces you to your soul. This is the space where you learn the language of your intuition again, the voice that got drowned out by obligation, noise, and performance. You start spending time with your thoughts, not to judge them, but to understand them. You stop seeking mirrors in others and begin polishing the one inside. You realize that your fear of being alone was actually a fear of meeting yourself. And when you meet yourself, really meet yourself, you don't want to abandon that person ever again. Third, the choice to feel it all. You've spent years numbing, with busyness, with people, with perfectionism, with scrolling, drinking, fixing, achieving. Now you choose to feel. The rage, the sorrow, the betrayal, the grief. It rises like a tidal wave, threatening to drown you. But it doesn't, because feeling is not the enemy. Suppression is. As Nietzsche warned, that which does not kill us makes us stronger, but only if it is processed. Not buried, not denied, not glorified, but faced, grieved, and released. And when you do this, when you allow the wound to breathe, you reclaim the power that was stolen from you the moment you were told your pain was too much. Now, you realize it wasn't too much. It was yours. Fourth, the choice to build a new code. This is where you stop asking, what do they want from me? And start asking, what do I need from me? You define what love looks like, not as obligation, but as mutual growth. You define what peace feels like, not as the absence of conflict, but the presence of clarity. You define what success means, not as approval from the crowd, but alignment with your purpose. This is where you stop tolerating relationships that drain your spirit, jobs that silence your gifts, or systems that require your compliance in exchange for crumbs of validation. And no, it's not easy. You will lose people. You will second-guess yourself. You will grieve the familiar discomfort you once called home. But you will also gain something so much more valuable, yourself. Consider Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of the Holocaust and emerged with this insight. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. This is your way now, one shaped not by trauma, but by truth. You are not healing to become more palatable. You are healing to become whole. You are not healing to fit back into places that broke you. You are healing to build a world that never requires you to fracture again. And here's the most counterintuitive truth of all. Healing doesn't make you softer. It makes you sharper. Sharper in discernment. Sharper in knowing when to walk away. Sharper in spotting manipulation masked as love. Sharper in sensing who's genuine and who's just rehearsing empathy. Because the more you love yourself, the less willing you are to be loved in halves. You become the rebellion by becoming the mirror, reflecting back to others what it means to choose truth over performance, presence over pretense, depth over drama. And some will see you and feel threatened. Others will see you and feel free. You are no longer a character in someone else's script. You are the author now, not of a fairy tale, not of a performance, but of a life that finally feels like home. The rebellion isn't noise. It isn't violence. It isn't fire. The rebellion is a quiet woman deleting a number. A man turning off his phone after setting a boundary. A daughter saying no more to the patterns of her mother. A friend walking away from a one-sided bond. A soul choosing itself not out of selfishness but sovereignty. This is not destruction. This is rebirth. And rebirth always comes after death. The death of the mask. The death of the performance. The death of the you that needed to be needed just to feel real. Now you are real. You exist on your own terms. You are the rebellion, and the revolution begins within. What if the greatest lie you've ever believed is that love must hurt? That pain is the price of intimacy. That to be good, you must be small. That to be strong, you must tolerate. That to belong, you must bleed. But healing, true healing, is the slow, agonizing, miraculous undoing of this lie. It does not arrive as thunder. It comes like a whisper, a voice from within, familiar and strange all at once, not screaming at you to change, not shaming you for the years you spent pretending, but saying very simply, you were never meant to live this way. Imagine this: you're standing in front of a mirror, not the kind made of glass, but the kind formed by awareness. And for the first time, you see not the reflection others built for you, not the expectations, not the projections, not the trauma-shaped armor, but you, the child who once begged to be seen, the teenager who made themselves invisible to avoid rejection, the adult who's been performing at the altar of other people's comfort. And as you stand there, something within you cracks. Not a break, but an opening. A light begins to leak in, not from above, from within. It was never gone, only buried, under duty, under guilt, under survival. Here is the ultimate truth. Healing is not about becoming invincible. It's about becoming unapologetically human. There is no arrival, no place where nothing hurts, no utopia where rejection no longer stings or fear never visits. But there is wholeness. And wholeness means you are no longer split between who you are and who the world demanded you become. You stop editing your laughter. You stop dimming your intuition. You stop pretending you're fine when your soul is on fire. You become safe within yourself. And when you're safe with yourself, you no longer tolerate environments that feel like war zones. You begin to realize that your standards are not high, they are holy. Your no is a prayer. Your boundaries are sacred. Your solitude is a temple. Your discomfort is a teacher. Your triggers are maps, not back into pain but out of the maze. Because what triggers you isn't just what hurts. It's what's still unhealed. But now, when the old wounds whisper, you're too much, you're hard to love, you're selfish for leaving, you recognize the voice. It's the ghost of a past you've outgrown. And you gently, lovingly, finally say, not anymore. Not because you're bitter, not because you've stopped loving, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself to be loved. This is the paradox. The more you love yourself, the less you tolerate. But the less you tolerate, the more deeply you actually love. Because love without boundaries is not love. It's erosion. It's martyrdom. It's self-sacrifice dressed up as virtue. And you no longer bleed for love. You build it. You build it on truth, on choice, on the shared, sacred agreement. We are here to grow, not to destroy each other. You stop trying to earn your place in people's lives. You understand that people who are aligned with your soul will not require you to shrink, apologize, or edit yourself to be enough. You become less impressed with charm and more interested in character. Less seduced by attention and more curious about presence. You stop chasing those who are allergic to depth. You look around and realize that the life you once thought was too much to ask for is now the bare minimum. Because here's the final, most powerful realization. Healing doesn't just change what you accept from others. It changes what you expect from life. You stop settling. In relationships, in work, in friendships, in joy. You start demanding not perfection but alignment. You no longer mistake intensity for intimacy, chaos for passion, or sacrifice for loyalty. You begin to recognize that your peace is not the absence of problems. It's the presence of self. And in that peace, you meet a version of yourself that's been waiting all along. The one who doesn't flinch at silence. The one who doesn't panic at distance. The one who doesn't settle when their soul says no. You realize you are not hard to love. You've just been loving from your wounds, and now you are ready to love from your wisdom. You don't just survive anymore. You choose. You choose slow over frantic, real over perfect, truth over comfort, wholeness over approval, depth over popularity. And no, not everyone will understand. That's okay. Your healing is not a consensus. It's not a performance. It's not a currency. It is a declaration that your soul is no longer for sale, that your time is sacred, that your presence is earned, not owed, that your heart, once shattered, now beats to its own rhythm. And this rhythm, it is a song only the free can hear. So if people say you've changed, let them. If they say you're distant, let them. If they say you're cold, let them. Because you're not cold, you've just stopped lighting yourself on fire to keep others warm. You're not distant, you're just finally close to yourself. You're not angry, you're just awake. And the awakened version of you, the one who no longer tolerates what once broke you, is not cruel. It's clear. Clear on who you are. Clear on what you deserve. Clear on what you're no longer willing to sacrifice. Because you've seen too much. You've lost too much. You've become too much to go back now. This is the moment, not of arrival but reunion, with the you who always knew, who always whispered, who always waited. And now that you've returned, you're never leaving again.